Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome and breakfast of the. This is the second time in a row, isn't it? I can't even talk in the morning no more. I think I need a double shot of this espresso. Good morning, Rabotai. Welcome to breakfast in the class, which is dedicated today for the Refuah Shlema of Zakiya Bat Shirley anonymously. And as well in loving memory and Lilui Nishmat Rachel Bat Shulamit, Alei Shalom, sponsored by Manny Haber. And in loving memory and Lilui Nishmat Sarah Bat Rachel, Alei Shalom, sponsored by her children Margaret and Isaac Katan. In loving memory and Lilui Nishmat Shaba Bat Masuda, or Haba Bat Masuda, sponsored by her brother Gabriel Amos. In loving memory of Raymonde and David Sofer, Aleim Shalom. Lilui Nishmatem David Moshe Ben Naima and Simcha Bat Hana, Aleim Shalom, sponsored by their son Edward Sofer. And in loving memory of Meir's mother Rivka Cohen, Aleim Shalom, Lilui Nishmat Rivka Bat Morvari, sponsored by Glory and Meir Cohen. As well in loving memory of Bracha Polet Bat Rachel Shaban. We also would love that the class should be as a chut for baby Mia Bat Chana for Refuah Shlema Bekarov. Okay, Rabotai, we discussed yesterday the idea that the Aron itself was created out of gold on the outside and gold on the inside and wood in the middle. And one of the reasons why we explained was that in the process of understanding the holiness of Torah, it's important for a person to recognize the elements inside themselves that are not made of solid gold. Recognize, embrace, understand, and then channel those things towards something positive, and then you'll see the development of a person's inner character, developing in the most beautiful ways. However, I wanted also to mention one other element that our rabbis speak about with regards to the Aron Kodesh. We mentioned also yesterday that aside from the wood and the Aron, there's also an anomaly in the measurements of the Aron that it had half measurements on every side, 2.5 by 1.5 by 1.5. And the Baal HaTurim writes that the reason why the Aron was given in half measures as it was in order to illustrate that the person who is supposed to be a Talmid Chacham, a person who's supposed to be living their life in the epicenter of holiness and growth, the most important midah that he can have is to always feel as if he is not complete, as if there is more to achieve. So the number one recipe, if you will, for growth in a person's life is the humility that they have in order to be able to listen and try and grow from interacting with another person. So the half measure of the Aron teaches and communicates to us that it is the way of a true Talmid Chacham to have that humility and understanding of himself. In fact, the Chidah HaKadosh writes something magnificent. He says, the Pasuk says in the Torah, Darosh Darash Moshe, that Moshe, he looked he was trying to find out what happened with, okay? Interestingly enough, that is the name of the title of Rav Moshe Feinstein's book on the Torah called Darash Moshe. But what's interesting to me about the Pasuk is that the Pasuk says, the Mishnah in Masechet Sofrim says about this Pasuk, it says that in every Sefer Torah, when they write the words Darosh, Darash, Moshe, they write the first Darosh at the end of the sentence, at the end of the line. And then the second Darosh, Darash, the second one is at the beginning of the second line. And the Chidah writes, why is it that it was written in such a way that Darosh, Darash, Moshe, that Moshe was the one who drew out, who interpreted, who was seeking out this snake. Darosh, Darash, Moshe, Vehine Saraf, and suddenly there was a snake, okay? And the answer the Chidah gives is magnificent. He says, you take a person like Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the greatest Jew that ever lived. What did Moshe know in Torah? is the wrong question. Because really, Moshe Rabbeinu was the only Talmid Chacham who knew all of Torah. Now granted, when he was up in Shamayim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu showed him the crowns of the letters. He said, Rabbi Akiva is going to be the one that's Doreshit. But at the end of the day, Hashem revealed to Moshe all of Torah, all of it. Okay? And yet, we understand, even Moshe, who knew all of Torah, the Gemara says, Afilu, even the Chidushim, the interesting interpretations, Shel Tamid Vatik, of some student in the future who sits and learns Gemara, comes up with a Chidush, Moshe Rabbeinu was taught that as well. He was given every element of Torah. Literally, when we say Moshe Kibel Torah Misinai, he received all of it. And yet, when Moshe Rabbeinu passes away, the Kli Yakar points out, that what does Moshe Rabbeinu say? He says, Ata hachilota ve'etchanan el Hashem. I prayed to God at that time. Le'mor, saying to Hashem, Hashem Elokim, Ata hachilota leharot et avdecha. You have begun to show your servant et godlecha, your greatness. Moshe Rabbeinu considered all of the wisdom that he knew as just something which was the beginning. The power of Moshe Rabbeinu was Darosh, Darash Moshe. The first Darosh is at the end of the line. Most people, that's how they learn. They study and they feel, I'm at the end of the line. I know the Masechet, I know Shas, I know Poskim, I know the Mishnah, I know the Yalkut Yosef, whatever it is the guy's learning. I know, I learned that. But Moshe Rabbeinu's power was, on the beginning of the new line, was Darash Moshe. That Moshe felt like he was still at the beginning of a new line. What a powerful idea that is. Ata hachilota, at the end of the greatest ever, what does he say? Ata, God, you have begun to show me. What a beautiful, a magnificent concept, and the humility that's required for true Torah learning and growth. You know, most of us feel, I'm not a Sadiq. I'm not a righteous guy. But I'm pretty good. My friends, they don't come at all. So I come most days. I'm pretty good. I'm good. Rabbi, I never learned ever. Now I'm listening to the daily classes. So, Rabbi, and you think, you're always telling us to grow more and more. I don't need to grow more and more. One guy told me. He says, Rabbi, he goes, I don't need to grow more and more. I said, why not? He goes, because when I started listening to daily classes with you, it was between 7 and 10 minutes. He goes, and then it went to 15 minutes. Now it's 30 minutes. So it's slowly growing. I don't need to grow because you're growing for me. The class is getting bigger. I said, that's not enough, honey. Rohi, that's not enough. This is a great way to start your day. It's a great way to walk on the street. It's a great way to be on the, on the Peloton. Someone sent me a message just yesterday. They said they got a shout out in the shiur. They said it was better than getting a shout out on Peloton. Yeah, Annie. I thought that would have been a magnificent thing. And then I was thinking to myself, what's it called? The word Peloton, that's what the nutrikun of the word is. Pe laten. The person speaks to be able to give someone a little chizuk. That's what the instructors do on Peloton. They tell you, come on, Shlomo, you can do it. Right? So you think, oh, the guy thinks I can do it? Fantastic, I can. Right? So I think the point here as well, Rabotai, in the growing of Torah, the prerequisite of growing in Torah, and indeed in anything, is in coming in with the humility and saying, I do not know everything that there is to know. Yes, it's the end of the line, but what do I have right there in the beginning? I have a new line, I think that there's something beautiful about the fact that every Gemara, if you open up the Gemara, the first page that you starts already on Bet, right? And everyone always wants this. Why is the first page of the Gemara Bet, right? Why is not the first page of the Gemara Aleph? You ever wondered this question? So someone once told me, what do you mean? They took a cue from the first letter of the Torah, which is also Bet, Bereshit. I said that's very cute. But I heard once from one of my rabbis, he said something very beautiful. He says, the reason why you start with the Masechet on the second page and not on the first page is because a lot of times a person comes to the first page and they think it's harder to start something new. You know why? Hajj, I learned this whole thing. I'm going to start. You turn up, it's already on page 2. Hazaka Baruch, it helps it flow. And what I saw in that little pithy explanation from the rabbi is that there's a lot of tricks that work with people that seem to be so stupid, so silly, so inane, so absurd, and yet they work. One of my favorite examples of this, I mentioned this last week, was what's going on in Bnei Brak now. In Bnei Brak, they had lots of people that decided they didn't want to go and get the vaccine, right? Why did they not want to get the vaccine? Because they read an article that said it's a problem. Someone told them that it causes fertility issues. So that's a very serious thing, right? So what did they decide to do? How are they going to get people to take the vaccine? Thursday night, they give out vaccines and cholent. Chulent. They're giving Chamin a bowl of cholent. And I'm thinking to myself, the guy who came up with this idea has to be fired, right? This is, you want to get a guy who thinks he's going to have fertility issues, you should give him a vaccine shot in one arm and the other arm fertility drugs. That's the way you convince him, right? You don't give the guy cholent. The answer is cholent. For years and years and years, all these banks, right? You sign up, you get a bank. Remember this when we were younger? You sign up, open up a checking account, they give you a toaster. What's a toaster? You want me to be a customer of your bank for 20 years because you gave me a toaster I can get for $6? It's amazing. It works. These silly points, I remember for years. I'm swiping my card, I have more and more points and more points and more points. Every time I would go to use this card to go get a flight, I couldn't use it on that day. When can I use it? Okay, I'll go the next day. Not available. Tuesday, not available. When is it available? Next year, and the wrong day, and you have to fly back home before you left. And then it's valid, But still, I felt like, I'm getting stuff. I don't know what I'm getting, but I'm getting stuff, It's amazing. The tricks that you could play on a person in order to be able to understand that he needs to grow or she needs to grow. Sometimes even if they're very small, these little rewards that a person could reward themselves, they're very small, and in many ways they're very silly, But you know what? Somehow they work. And I think understanding this element, this nature of a human being is very important. So the Chidah continues and he says, Darash Moshe, you know why Moshe Rabbeinu, why Moshe pushed himself to study more, to learn more, to teach more? Vehine, and behold, saraf. And the Chidah says, you know what the word saraf stands for? I found this beautiful. He says, saraf stands for Shishim Ribo Panim. 600,000 faces. What is it? Shishim Ribo Panim? What's the Chidah saying? And the answer is that there's a famous line, a famous idea that says, Shivaim Panim La Torah. There are 70 faces, 70 layers of understanding to the Torah. So what does it mean that there's 600,000? Shivim Panim, the Torah, the Gemara says. In fact, Gemara says it in Shabbat, Kepatish Yifotzet Sela, that you smash a stone, it breaks into a lot of pieces. So too the Torah, there's many different interpretations. However, and this is the magnificent concept here, for you and for me, there's 70 paths, 100%. But we know about Moshe Rabbeinu that one of the powers of Moshe was that his neshama, he was able to relate to each and every Jew. And he understood that the fact that each and every Jew was different one to the other meant that there was another layer of understanding and appreciation of the Torah that he could see through the eyes of somebody else. And if that was a possibility, then the exploration of Torah was endless. Where do we find this concept that all these people are different? The Gemara says it so beautifully. How do you know that all people think differently, that everyone is unique? The Gemara says, Kishem shepartzufehem shonot, just as their faces are different, kach de'otehem shonot, so too their thoughts and their understandings and their thought patterns are different. Rabotai, that means that how do you know someone thinks different? Because they have a different face. Darosh Dorash Moshe, he looked, he searched, V'hineh Saraf, and he beheld this idea that there was what was here, Shishim Ribo Panim, that there was 600,000 ways, 600,000 faces, which are 600,000 interpretations of Torah. There's always more to learn. Rabotai, if ever you thought that this was an interesting concept, right? That, okay, fine, come on, Rabbi's blowing it out of proportion. Talk to someone who comes from a different background about Judaism. And what's remarkable is, it's not just that they have different minhagim, but the dagesh, the point, the nikudah, the essence, the central nervous system, if you will, of the religion for them, for a different community, revolves around a different point than where you're from. You go to some communities, it's all about the synagogue, right? That's the focal point of the Jewish community's relationship with Judaism. Then you go to other places, people that don't really go to shul, but the Jewish component of the community revolves around, studying Torah. Everyone prays in a different little shtibel, right? But what draws the community together? What's the beating heart of the community? The yeshiva system, right? The fact that everyone studies together. So they pray in tiny rooms, but what are they at? But they study in giant halls. In other communities, they pray in giant rooms, but everybody studies by themselves. Isn't that interesting? So you find different approaches to the nature, to the beauty of Torah, and that process actually helps a person understand and grow and learn as they move through life. I'll add one last piece to this concept of humility. If you take a look for 1 second, what you're recognizing over here is that there's a difference between the gold on the outside and the wood on the inside. While it is true that the gold is more valuable, the gold will never grow. The wood is less valuable, but there's a possibility of growth in the wood that doesn't exist in gold. And something that has the capacity for growth is in many ways more central than the gold itself. Now listen to this, because I think this is a dynamite explanation in terms of the mashal. I want you to imagine that you go to the stock market. You look down the list of stocks, you see a certain stock, most valuable stock in the whole stock market. An idiot says, oh, that's the thing I want to invest in. That's what I want to invest in. That's not how you make money. The fact that something has maximized its valuation, so you bought it at $1,000, it's at the ceiling of its capability. That is what it's worth. The real money is found in something which is much cheaper, right? Because the space between its purchase price and the fulfillment of its potential is far. That's where you make serious gains. So too the Aron is saying to us, it's teaching us something amazing. You look at somebody or something, it's gold, and you think, here you go, fantastic, here's the product. In this product, there's nothing more, you hit the ceiling already. The maximum growth opportunity, the gross domestic product of the Jewish people, that's not where it's found. It's found in the people that are wood, that have a possibility within them for growth. And even if it won't be as valuable as this gold thing, but the discrepancy from where it is to where it goes is much bigger. Rabotai, there's a story with the Sfat Emet. A guy once came to the Sfat Emet and he said to his rabbi, he says, Rabbi, I look at you, I don't understand how you're so religious, how you're so righteous, how you know so much Torah. He says, and instead of being inspired by you, Rabbi, he says, I'm depressed by you. He says, I look at you and I feel like I'm such a nobody, I'm such a, I have so far to go, I can never become what you've become. So instead of inspiring and motivating me, it just makes me want to hang up the sneakers. The rabbi said to him, he said, I want to give you an example. There was once a guy, he puts on all his gear, his boots, his knee pads, his sweatband on the front, and his things, all these. I always see these guys, whenever you see a guy wearing a sweatband on his head at the basketball court and sweatbands on his wrists, first of all, that's how you know that guy's the worst guy, by the way. That's the one. Number two, I'm always impressed by the volume of sweat required to be able to knit a sweatband on your head. How much sweat is pouring down your arm? Right? I don't think you're doing the right sport here. I think maybe if you have rivers of sweat that need to be, your hands need to be shielded from the oceans of sweat pouring down your arms. I think you're playing the wrong sport. Okay, either way, right? So this guy, he's got the gear on, he has an oxygen tank on his back, he's climbing up the hill, finally, he gets to the top, that's Darth Vader, he gets to the top of the hill, he raises his arms, he's like, King of the world, right? And he feels amazing, and he hears the sound back, King of the world, King of the world, King of the world. While he's sitting there feeling like Superman at the top of the mountain, some kid taps him on the back. He's got sleepy eyes. He's like, would you mind keeping it down? I'm trying to sleep over here. The guy's like looking at this kid. He's like, I can't believe it. He goes, you have no knee pads. You have no boots. You have no sweatbands on your arms and your head. Right? You have no oxygen tank. It killed me to get up here. I've been training for months to climb Everest, Kilimanjaro, whatever it is. And here you are, just wandering around, happy as Larry. I always wondered, by the way, who is Larry, that he's always the semel of happiness. Either way, happy as Larry. So I said to the kid says to this guy who's now feeling bad, he thought he was doing amazing, and he sees this kid. The kid says, come with me. Takes his heavily gloved, sweat-banded hands, and he walks him right around the bend, and in the bend there's a whole little cave. And he says, I didn't climb here. I was born here. This is my house. This guy looks at the kid, he feels terrible. Like, oh, what did I do? The kid could do it. What I'm doing, a child can do. The child can't do it. The child was born there. Sfat Emet says, my father's a rabbi. My grandfather. I was born into this. I was born on top of the mountain. So you're looking at me and you think, wow. Meanwhile, who climbed? You climbed. What you did is much more than what I did. The wood that cannot fathom ever being as expensive, as pure, as holy as the gold has nothing to worry about. Because the gold was born at the top of the mountain. What Borei Olam is seeking, is looking for, is for people that grow. And sometimes I look at these Ba'alei Teshuvah, and it makes me want to cry. Just with such admiration. A person comes from a completely secular background. They start to listen to Torah. They start to get involved. They come to the shul. Next thing you know, the guy's keeping kosher. Never kept kosher in his life. Favorite food is seafood. His favorite, he can't wait to go to Israel. I have so many people. Can't wait to go to Israel. Why? Kosher Mackie D's. So some people look down on that. I think that's amazing. The guy gave up his double cheeseburger, right? And now he can't wait to eat it kosher. We don't have to poop on the guy's head because he doesn't want to go to the kotel. Like, that's also a beautiful thing. And I always ask myself, and I ask people around me who are not so happy with this Baal Teshuvah, or this guy who brought his phone to Friday night dinner. I say to them, if you could tell me that the growth that you have had has covered as much distance as he has covered in his life, or she's covered in her life, then we can have this conversation. Don't looking down on a guy because he's not like you, when you've been doing this from the moment you were born into a community that's been doing it from the moment it was born, led by rabbis, by great rabbis. Not everyone has that opportunity. Rabotai, in the innermost part of the Kodesh HaKodashim, what lies at the core of the beauty of Torah, of the Aron HaKodesh, is a unquenchable thirst for growth. A thirst for growth even when it's not so much, and even when it's not so great, with the humility to understand that I have more to learn and I have more to go. And if a person approaches this world with that humility, then suddenly, Ezehu Chacham Halomed Mikol Adam, a person is wise because he's capable of learning from everybody. Moshe understood that the Darash Moshe was the beginning of a new line, because V'hineh Saraf, there was 600,000 different opinions in Torah that he needed to hear. And you know what? I read this chidah and I understood something. I thought, again, maybe it's a big chidush. But it says that before Yitro came along, Moshe Rabbeinu would adjudicate all the different court cases of all the Jewish people. They're waiting from the morning till the night. And I thought to myself, Moshe wasn't smart enough to come up with Yitro's answer? Moshe had never heard of the concept assistant rabbi? Is that the problem? Right? In Egypt, they had structures of the king and the advisors, the Khartoumim, the people working with the... He had seen structure. Why did Moshe want to rule the court cases of every Jew? And the answer is because Moshe desired to be able to learn and to see and to understand how each Jew that came in with the court case felt that the Torah was saying this, or this was the right thing to do, or that was the right thing to do. Moshe understood that in his role as a teacher, if he wasn't seeing and coming into contact with all the Jews, he wasn't getting all of the Torah. If he wasn't getting all of the Torah, how could he communicate all of the Torah to the Jewish people? So let the lines be there, because I grow as the rabbi of all rabbis. I grow, like the Mishnah says, from my rabbis I've learned a lot. From my friends, my chavrutas, even more. Umi talmidai yoter mikulam, and from my students, the most of all. That is the humility of Moshe. That is the power of his growth trajectory. That is the wood inside the Aron. May we be zocheh to be humble enough to listen. Baruch Adonai le'olam. Amen ve'amen.